Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into some really interesting sources you shared with us about family law in South Africa.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. We've got material from an advocacy group, Flamea, they're called Flamea now,
hmm
and also an analysis that looks into alleged systemic bias in the legal system itself.
Right. So, our mission really is to unpack what these sources are saying about the history, the claims of ongoing bias, and also what's being done to try and change things.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so the material draws a pretty stark line between the past and present, doesn't it? Pre-1994 versus the new Constitution.
Absolutely. The analysis really highlights how, before 1994, South African family law was, well, heavily influenced by patriarchal ideas.
And the sources mention specific things like the maternal preference rule.
That's right. And the tender years doctrine. Basically, assumptions that mothers were automatically better caregivers, especially for young kids.
Kind of default settings back then.
Exactly. Because Parliament's decisions were final. But then, 1994 happened, the new Constitution.
Yeah.
A huge shift.
And this is where Section 9 comes in, the Equality Clause.
Precisely. Equality before the law, no discrimination based on gender or sex. That's key.
And Section 28, too, stating the child's best interests are paramount. Always.
Mm-hmm. According to these sources, that fundamentally changed the legal basis. Those old doctrines, they argue, became unconstitutional.
Because they clash with equality and the need to look at each specific child's situation.
Yes, exactly. You can't just apply a blanket gender-based rule anymore, legally speaking.
Okay, but, and this is a big but in the sources, they claim that despite the Constitution, these biases still kind of exist in practice. De
Yeah.
facto.
That's the core argument presented, yes. The material points to the Children's Act of 2005. It was meant to embed those constitutional rights for kids.
But there's a critique there, isn't there, particularly about unmarried fathers.
Right. The sources highlight a difference in how the Act treats parents. Under Section 19, mothers automatically get full parental rights and responsibilities.
Okay.
And married fathers, under Section 20, they also get them automatically.
But unmarried fathers, that's Section 21.
Yes, and Section 21 lays out specific conditions they have to meet, like living with the mother permanently when the child was born, or consenting to be named the father and contributing financially. It's not automatic.
So the argument in the source material is that this difference, based on gender and marital status, effectively creates an unequal playing field.
That's the claim, that it puts an extra hurdle in front of unmarried fathers compared to mothers or married dads. And the sources add that it's actually hard to track how widespread this alleged bias is,
Why is that?
because many judgments from the children's courts where these cases are often heard aren't officially reported. So getting a clear, data-driven picture is tough.
Right, that makes sense. So moving on, what do the sources suggest are the broader consequences of these alleged persistent biases, the socioeconomic impacts?
Well, the material suggests they could be quite significant. There's talk about fathers feeling marginalized, potentially demotivated.
And the sources even link this, tentatively perhaps, to wider social issues.
Yes, things like unemployment and even crime rates are mentioned in the material as potential knock-on effects of this alleged marginalization. Again, these are claims presented in the sources.
And for mothers, there was mention of a double burden.
The idea presented is that mothers are often still expected, maybe implicitly by societal norms or perceived court leanings, to be primary caregivers.
While also being encouraged or needing to participate fully in the workforce.
Exactly. That's the double burden argument. The sources also bring up an interesting point about perceptions of financial contribution,
Oh.
pointing out that while men might contribute significantly through taxes, social grants often go directly to mothers, which, according to these sources, might visually underrepresent the father's overall financial input into the systems supporting the child.
Interesting perspective from the sources. Okay, so this alleged systemic problem leads us to the advocacy group, Flamea.
Right, Flamea, now Flamea. The sources describe them as a movement really born out of fathers' own experiences with what they saw as systemic injustice.
And their mission, as presented.
To challenge this alleged discrimination, push for genuine equality for all parents, and critically, always keep the child's best interests right at the center.
And the material emphasizes their view isn't about pitting fathers against mothers.
No, quite the opposite, according to the sources. It's framed as being about family integrity, the idea that the child generally needs meaningful involvement from both parents.
And how do they plan to achieve this, based on the sources?
Their strategy seems multi-pronged. Collecting community data, trying to show statistical evidence of alleged bias, public awareness campaigns, lobbying Parliament for legislative tweaks, and even strategic court cases to challenge existing laws or practices.
Essentially providing tools for fathers, they say, to assert their rights under the Constitution.
That appears to be the goal outlined in the material.
So, wrapping this up, these sources really present a complex picture, don't they? South Africa's constitutional ideals on family law versus the alleged reality on the ground.
hmm That tension between the historical baggage and the constitutional promise and the claimed impact on families, that really comes through strongly in the material we looked at.
It definitely leaves us, and you listening, with a big question. How does a society ensure that powerful constitutional guarantees actually translate into fair, lived experiences for everyone, especially in an area as sensitive and personal as family?
Something to really think about.
Indeed. We hope this deep dive give you some valuable perspective.